So we've been talking about symptom as signifier at the bottom of page 194. And I've suggested that this doesn't work through representation. Signifiers work by being connected to other different signifiers. A whole web of signifiers is what gives meaning to one of them, regardless of their referential or representative work. They're connected through a series of articulations with other different signifiers. And the example that we were working with here was that of a dictionary. A dictionary contains many words. You can look up all kinds of things in a dictionary, but each definition will be comprised of different words that in turn would need to be looked up if you were new to that language. So let's get on with the reading here. A signifier has meaning only through its relation to another signifier. That's the example of looking up a word in the dictionary. Cat only has meaning in relation to another signifier like fuzzy. Moving on. The truth, there's that word again, the truth of symptoms resides in this articulation. You see, the truth of smoke, you might say, resides in fire, in what it represents. Lacan is not saying that. He might be saying the truth of smoke resides in its relationship to something like fire. Here's what he's saying. The truth of symptoms resides in this articulation, not in what they point to, but in what they're connected to. Symptoms remain somewhat vague when they're understood as representing some eruption of truth. And they do. They remain somewhat vague when you understand a symptom as a representation of some underlying clinical structure. In fact, they are truth. That's the key move that he's making here. The symptom doesn't represent an underlying truth. The symptom is the truth. And that's the mystery to get unraveled here. It is made of the same wood from which truth is made. If we posit materialistically that truth is what is instated on the basis of the signifying chain, which you can think of as language use. Let's see what we can make of this. First things first, we might be able to add some things to these phrases. That last one in particular. If we posit materialistically that truth is what is instated by way of symptom or through symptoms on the basis of a signifying chain. So truth and symptoms are occurring in the same articulative order. And this, Lacan says, is key. Not what's beyond the order, but what we see as the order itself. In Lacanian Psychoanalysis, this order is of course known as the symbolic, and you can look it up and learn a lot. It signifies society, language, law, order, normativity, all the rules and expectations and ethics that come with a given community. But primarily for our purposes, language. The symbolic is this signifying order that he talks about at the bottom of 194. Now let's scroll down a little bit and get into what's at stake here in this understanding of symptoms. If we understand symptoms and truth as functions of language, as a signifying order, remember the example of the dictionary, we can draw some implications from this. So what Lacan is going to do here is he's going to assume that you have a pretty good understanding of symptoms as signifiers and signifiers as entities whose truth reside in their articulation with other signifiers. The example here again is language. Symptoms are like words in a language, and they derive their meaning by being connected to other symptoms. Now, let's take an example of this, a classic example. Let's talk about how repression works. So, there's a traumatic event, a car crash, worst event of your life. Now, it's tough for you to think of this event on a daily basis, much less at the time of its occurrence. In fact, at the time of the occurrence, you may have found that you repressed much of this event. Now, what that means is not that you took the entire event and condensed it into a single memory and then shoved that into the depths of your unconscious. That's not the case. What gets repressed during and after a traumatic event is a signifier of that event. Some part of that event that is brought forth and repressed. Now, I wouldn't say that this signifier represents the event. It's not a part that represents the whole, the way that the trope of synecdoche would work. It's more like a metonym. It's a condensation, a part that is functioning and just as powerful as the whole. So the logic here would not be synecdochic, but metonymic. Synecdoche, metonymy, you can look them up. Now, what happens as time goes on? You had the car crash. You repressed some part of that. Now, let's say the part that you repressed was the feeling of your bloody clothing stuck to your skin. You were wearing a velvet shirt, soaked in blood, stuck to your skin. And that's the creepy, crawly part of that experience that you grabbed hold of and shoved under, repressing it. Now, as time goes on, you get over as much as possible this horrible car accident. But the repressed signifier from this accident, the feeling of wet velvet, bloodied and stuck to your skin, stays with you. And it stays with you in the unconscious as you move through life. And then suddenly, you're at Goodwill, looking around for a new shirt, and you're going through the racks, and all of a sudden you touch a shirt that is velvet. And you immediately recoil in horror and disgust. You can't imagine this shirt ever being near you, and you're like, oh my God, and you leave the store. Or something worse. But you recoil in disgust. You've had a reaction to one of these pieces of clothing. Now, what's happening in this moment is that this repressed signifier has gone along until it finds a connection to another signifier in your environment. Here, the shirt on the rack at Goodwill. And once those two signifiers connect, the one of which you're conscious, the shirt at Goodwill, and the one of which you are unconscious, the repressed feeling of velvet stuck to your skin from that car accident. Now suddenly, the signifier that is the shirt at Goodwill connects retroactively to the primal scene or the traumatic event of the car crash. And that's how that connection works. What you get established as a result of this is an entire web of signifiers. You have the traumatic event. You have the repressed signifier here, R1. R1 goes on in time. Until it connects to R2, which is the shirt at Goodwill. At which point R2 establishes a retroactive relationship to the traumatic event. Now, what you have here is a series of signifiers brought together in a signifying order. They are articulate in a signifying order. And the truth of all of this is not so much the traumatic event, but the order itself in which the trauma occurs in the future as a signifier. The shirt at Goodwill does not represent the trauma. It signifies it. It connects to it. It drags it forward. It makes it present. That's why you recoil in disgust. The shirt itself becomes as powerful as the traumatic event, enough to make you recoil in disgust and even storm out of the store. What we have here is an understanding of symptoms that are based on their connection to other symptoms in a signifying order. The word I've been using is signifier, but for Lacan, at this point in his career, signifier and symptom operate according to the same logics. Not logics of representation, but logics of signifierness, of articulation. Logics that very close to relate to language.